Good morning, everyone. Class of 2028. I can't believe we're finally getting here. But I'm Lauren Cook. I am the Dean of College and Gap Year Advising at JCHS. It's nice to see some familiar faces, and I think there's a lot of new folks here to me as well. So, part of our goal this morning is going to be to get to know each other. Going to just start with a couple of housekeeping items. Um, Everybody's on mute. That's sort of the default in my room. I'd asked you to stay that way for now. I've got about 15 minutes or so of content, and then the balance of the time will be for Q&A. So at that point, whether you raise your Zoom hand, put something in the chat, whatever works best for you, I'm happy to take all the questions that you might have at this moment. We are recording, so be on your best behavior. We'll be sending this out to anyone who missed this next week. And then we will have a hard stop at 9 o'clock. And if we're out of questions by then, great. But if there are still questions coming in, know that we've got the next 2 years to be on this journey together. You can always email me. I'm happy to answer follow-up questions. But I do just want to honor everybody's time today and just keep this to an hour. So this is an annual event that I've been doing with sophomore parents. And I want to start with the college convo at this point just to kind of get us thinking about things if you aren't sort of locked into this. But to keep it casual before the process starts in earnest next year. And it's purposeful that I'm talking to all of you just specifically as parents and guardians. I think it's a little early for the kids at this moment, or most of the kids, and their job is to really be high school students at this moment. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and start with that. Terrific. So talking about college admission at this moment may inspire some excitement for you. Maybe you've been chomping at the bit to talk about this for your child. It might make you a little anxious. It might just inspire confusion because the process is continually changing and shifting. This is all valid. And the responses may be heightened if you yourself didn't attend college or didn't attend college in the US, because obviously our system is a little bit more complex than what you'll find in other countries. And that's both a strength of the US options. There's great diversity to choose from in terms of post-high school choices. But it also can be a headache because it is more complicated and has more nuance and is, oops, sorry about that, a little less straightforward. And I do just want to name now that not one size fits all as we're talking about life post JCHS. I love that I'm getting to counsel students kind of across the spectrum. I'm sure that some families on this call are thinking about some of the most sort of highly rejective universities with those single digit admit numbers. Other places, other folks may be thinking about more broad access places where their mission is to educate as many people as possible. We may have folks thinking about community college transfer paths, about the IDF, about gap years, and I love that this is the community that JCHS educates, and I want you to love it as well. And just set a reminder as we're going forward here, plant a seed now, that whatever your particular interest is for your child at this point, or whatever your particular family goals are, might not be the same for other classmates. And so the messages, or maybe even some judgment that might come, about the process to your students, they do carry with them to school, and they will sometimes pair it to their classmates. So as much as we can be as adults supportive, open, curious about the options, and support everyone in their individual pathways, and then stay focused on your individual student, the more useful I think this experience will be for everyone. So just a gentle reminder on that. But then my goals for today obviously want you to get introduced to me. I may have worked with an older sibling in your family, terrific. But if not, let you know a little bit about who you're working with. And then you may want to know, like, what can I be doing right now with my child to be thinking about college? And we'll have plenty of time for all of the granular pieces of the application. But I want to talk a little bit about just some general independent skills to be thinking about. And maybe your child has some of them down pat, great. Maybe there are others sort of a growth edge for them. So talk a little bit about things that will prepare and help them with the process. And then preview the process sort of from a 30,000 foot level that we have at JCHS and the pathway throughout junior and senior year. So you have a general sense about what's coming down the road, and then open it up for Q&A. So that's the plan. Hope that works. So just to briefly touch on me, I am in my 28th year in college admission, which is crazy. I worked at a selective liberal arts college before becoming a high school college counselor. So know that I engaged for almost two decades in terms of reading essays, interviewing students, conducting workshops, often with other peers from other colleges. There's a lot of collective group travel and group presentations and all the rest. So I do have a pretty good general core sense of what makes a good college application. I've also worked on both coasts, and I have a pretty extensive network of peers on what we call both sides of the desk, both the high school side and the college side. And I'm regularly tapping into them to make sure I'm staying on top of what best practices are in the field, resources for me and for all of you as we're kind of dealing with this shifting landscape with college admission. And I'm also a member of several professional organizations, both regionally and nationally. I've held leadership roles in them. I am out at conferences periodically because that is where I'm catching the best bits of knowledge, whether it's in a formal session or whether it's at the bar afterwards when, a dean at UCLA is bemoaning something. So those are really important. And I bring all of that back to JCHS so that I'm receiving training and updates and staying fresh and knowledgeable and giving that to your kids. So that's a little bit about me. To pivot into the college bit of it all and some of the life skills I mentioned. Obviously, the process is something that I help and guide. I kind of talk about myself to the kids as being their coach through this, but ideally, it's being driven by them in some ways. So these are some of the things I think they can do over the coming months to get ready to be in the driver's seat for this. So small talk with adults. And this can include both folks that and strangers, because there is a lot of talking with adults as they get into this process. As early as this coming fall, when we start having college admission reps come to JCHS and juniors are able to go and engage with those. So some of your kids may be very gregarious and open and ready to do this. Others may be a little bit more reticent. So I would be thinking purposefully over the next 6 to 8 months, are there family gatherings? Are there neighborhood gatherings? Are there things at shul where you can help them develop some confidence, some maturity to be able to go up, and whether it's giving a firm handshake or making eye contact with an adult, to really push them to get a little bit more comfortable with this, because they can make impressions with the adults in the process if they're able to sort of manage themselves with some maturity. In a similar vein, drafting emails to adults. And it's funny how email feels sort of so quaint now and sometimes confusing to our kids, even just formatting it correctly. But there's a lot of email in this process. And I spend a lot of time just reviewing like a 3 sentence email that a student is nervous to send to an admission rep responsible for JCHS, or an alum or a current student at the school who they want to tap into for their knowledge. So if you have been in the practice, which is perfectly developmentally appropriate for sophomores to be sending like some of their the communication on behalf of your student to faculty at school or whatnot. Now is the time to start thinking about ways that you can nudge them to start taking the driver's seat in those things, because then it will become a little bit more natural as they're moving into the admission process. Colleges their viewpoint is it's the students' process and they're the one enrolling on campus. So we'll get into on down the road appropriate ways for the adult interactions as well. But they really do want to hear from your child first and foremost. If you haven't had them start to do this already, at best, start a resume, but at a minimum, just a list of involvement activities, things that they are doing primarily in high school. Now is a time to just open a fresh Google Doc and say, okay, you did volleyball last year, you're doing it this year. You've had this position, these are the dates on it, and just leave it open that you can add to that then in the coming years. You did two shows at the school. You've joined the student advisory board, whatever it may be, things outside of school, if they volunteer at their shul, what they've done for their volunteer hours. Do a brain dump of what's happened so far, and then keep that, on the front burner to be adding to over the next couple of years. And if they started playing soccer in sixth grade, put the date in there for that. But it's going to make things infinitely easier when we get to the fall of senior year if they are not trying to sort of recreate the last couple of years on the fly, because they will be asked to kind of regurgitate all of this on an activities list in their applications. And they do get weirdly detailed about the average number of hours per week and weeks per year and all of that. So I would start this list if you're not already. A formal resume isn't asked for or required by most colleges, but it can be really nice if you have one. And certainly as they might start applying for jobs next year and senior year, it's great to have one. Managing deadlines independently. Again, some of your kids may be great with this. In my experience, most of them are working on it. At JCHS, we do allow tremendous flexibility with academic work. It's part of the growth process and helping them be able to redo things and have extensions and all of that. Once they get to the college admission process, I often joke with my administrative peers at the school that they kind of run into a brick wall with me in that there is very little flexibility with deadlines around college admission. And I will be tracking as much as I can for all of them. I keep spreadsheets, I have reminders. I really do try and help provide some executive functioning support with this process, but it is way too much, for me to do that in tremendous detail for 40 to 45 kids. And if they cannot manage some of that themselves, there are some questions about, is college going to be the right fit for them right after graduation? So starting to think about how do they manage deadlines right now, whether it's extracurricularly, curricularly, and what are the ways that you can work on helping them strengthen that, or if they work with learning support at the schools, ways that those folks, we can partner with them to help strengthen that, so that by the time we get to sort of the summer before senior year, they may have some systems in place, whether it's reminders in their phone, on their calendar, whether it's leaving voice memos for themselves, to-do lists, maybe it's all of it, to help have some structure in place to be able to manage this process, because there are a lot of deadlines. And sometimes when you miss them, that's it. The opportunity has left the building. And then this may seem a little strange, but finding their way around somewhere unfamiliar. Some of your kids may commute in complicated ways to school, and this is, as a sophomore now, they're really getting on track with it. But if you drop them off, if they live relatively close, if their life is within a couple miles of the house, I would really encourage you over the next year or so to do some things that provide some friction for them. I think we've got kids that are in kind of a frictionless world at this point, and even Google Maps can help them, find their way somewhere. But this is another independent skill that is going to be important once they get to college, whether they're on a giant UC campus or a small liberal arts campus, to be able to navigate and wayfind for themselves physically can be important. And I remember my mom doing this for me my senior year of high school. We went on like a girls' trip to St. Louis. We got to the airport and she said, okay, you're going to find our hotel for us. And I was enraged. She was asking me to do this. This was supposed to be like a fun, getaway. That clearly stuck with me. And whether it's taking them to the Cal campus and saying, okay, we're here at the BART stop, help me find the library, or whether it's going to a BART station and saying, all right, let's get to the Embarcadero and find our way to the ferry building. Encourage them to start thinking about how to get themselves around independently. Okay, I'm going to stop there on the tips and pivot more specifically into some of the college advising overview so you know what's coming down the pike in the immediate future. So they will be entering junior year in just a couple of months. So know that once we hit the summer, and hopefully they've got some interesting plans, and that can be any number of things, working, camp, volunteering, going on vacation somewhere, but something beyond just sort of playing Minecraft on the couch all summer. And At the end of the summer, usually early August, all of you, including parents will get something separately and students will get something separately, will get an invitation to sign up for SCORE. And that is the website, the kind of software that we use to organize the college search for students. It's where they can keep a list of schools that they're interested in and keeping track of. And it's how I electronically will eventually send their transcript and recommendation letters and all of that to colleges. So we'll get them into SCORE formally. And then I've got some new resources for returning parents on career and personality, like assessments, because I'm finding more and more students are not quite sure what they want to be doing, feeling like they have to have a plan sometimes as early as the beginning of junior year. And maybe some of your students do. That's probably going to change. But giving them some tools that I have vetted to help them start thinking about where their strengths are, where they're challenged, if there's any deal breakers, like they don't want to work with blood or they don't want to, have to do public speaking, so to cross some things off the list to help them as we're moving forward, making some college decisions. Then, as we get into the fall, as I mentioned, there will be anywhere from 80 to 100 college reps that come to JCHS, do a little half an hour song and dance on their school. Juniors and seniors are invited to come to those. They can miss class. I keep an eye to make sure they're not just trying to miss class. But I do encourage them to try and attend at least 5 visits. And they might have no idea where they want to be, no idea about size, about urban life, about women's college, about, any of it. So go to five different places and just try them on for size. And just hear the pitches, because that can help them as they're starting to figure out what their preferences might be, what they want to pursue. Then, as we get into the winter, we will have our official kickoff on Wednesday, December 2nd. You'll be getting lots of invites and whatnot for that. After that kickoff, everybody will get questionnaires, both parents and students. And this is the chance to really start a brain dump about what I should know about the student, about your family, about any goals or aspirations you have, things they've been involved with. And then we'll have initial one-on-one meetings. And I will make some draft college lists or see if the student already has a bunch of stuff in SCORE and we're just trying to kind of round out some choices for them to be thinking about. Into the spring, most folks are doing some testing, ACT, SAT, that sort of thing. We do a draft of a common application, the standard longer 650-word college essay in their English classes. So they go into the summer before senior year with some thoughts down on paper and some feedback from me and their English teacher. And it's a time to explore colleges. So right now, the current juniors are putting finishing touches on some PASOC break visits, might be taking advantage of some long weekends, and then thinking about the summer as well. And then as we get into the summer, continuing to do some investigation visits and thinking about narrowing down that college list a bit. So this next year is about sort of exploring options, seeing what's out there, laying the groundwork for things. And then as we get into senior year, things really go fast and furious. Usually August 1st of the fall before, or the summer before senior year, is kind of the starting gun. That's when most of the applications open. And as we get into the school year, meeting with me, I have application drop-in hours after school and during flex time where we can kind of work on things together. We're finalizing lists. I will also just say folks are attending college visits out in the world, but also with more specific purpose in the fall. They're thinking about relationship building with that rep. They're thinking about making themselves known, perhaps saying, I'm applying early decision to your school and I'm, so excited about you. So really trying to take advantage of, making connections with folks as they come to campus. And then they're finalizing writing. There's so much writing in the fall of senior year. It's one reason I really, am pro study hall by senior year. And then we start submitting applications as early at this point as the middle of October for some very specific places, like University of Georgia and some other folks that have apps that early. But November 1st is also then a big line of demarcation. A lot of colleges have that as their first deadline, and then into sort of January, we're submitting applications. And you may be applying for financial aid, which I provide support with, along with our partners with College Money Method, if you went to Paul's session a few weeks ago. You may be also applying for a gap year, which we can certainly get into. And I'm finding those deadlines sliding a little bit earlier too. And unfortunately, they're colliding a bit with when you're doing the college application work. And then in the spring, which is about where we're at with the seniors right now, we get the balance of their admission decisions and make some final enrollment decisions. And the universal reply date is typically May 1, where folks need to commit to a college. And then they coast, hopefully successfully, through to graduation. So that's the sort of upper level view of how things are going to go. I'll just close here before we get to Q&A with a couple of things about working with me. So this will start formally and like aggressively and regularly in the winter of junior year. But of course, we're developing a relationship before then. I have had some conversations with some of your kids about course scheduling for next year. Love the questions, love the proactivity, and know that after Journeys Week, a number of us in the professional community are coming together just to double check some of those course requests. So there are, I'm pretty aware of, a handful of your students who may get a follow-up, whether it's from Miss Matz or me or whatnot, saying, oh, are we sure we really want to try and tackle 5 APs as a junior or whatnot? So I am kind of in the weeds with a couple of your kids, looking at what they've signed up for and just wanting to provide the best advice so we can have a sane and impressive junior year. We will formally have the kickoff on December 2nd. And then I am happy to entertain other questions, but mostly either quickly at events or via email. That's a great way to give me the dump of questions and I can get back to you as I'm able. But I'd really ask that you hold off on scheduling live meetings with me until we're into the middle of junior year next year, because at this moment, I'm obviously balancing seniors getting and making decisions, juniors that are trying to get themselves sort of squared away with a solid list, and then just a little light tinkering with all of you. So that is my content. I am going to stop monologuing now and stop sharing my screen so I can see all of you again and see what we have questions about. So feel free to either unmute yourself and ask a question or put something in the chat if you've got a question. Erica, yes, go for it.
Hi, good morning, Lauren. Thank you for everything. Hi, everybody. One question that I had is the SAT, ACT prep.
Mhm,
And hearing from people with older kids and Levi, we've never done this before, that
mhm,
that's a good thing to begin to do in the summer. And
mhm.
then some whole dialogue amongst a certain group of friends regarding pressure for signing up for certain dates for that. So do
Yeah.
you have any advice for that?
I do. So the testing situation, I'll just first start off because sometimes there can be lingering questions too about where we're at with the testing landscape. And I will say we're in the zone right now where if more schools are going to move back to requiring the ACT or the SAT, I think we will hear about it within the next month or two. Otherwise, I think we might be in kind of a status quo situation. So just to catch everyone up, back during COVID, everybody pretty much went test optional, except for the public institutions in the states of Florida and Georgia, because their state legislator determined that they decided COVID wasn't a thing. So they continue to require testing. Most of the Ivies, save for Columbia, have gone back to requiring testing. And then some sort of highly technical schools. So places like MIT, Caltech, if you're thinking about a STEM career, they find great help in that data. Otherwise, the broad swath of places are still test optional across the country and in most cases internationally, although testing can be more important to be competitive if you're thinking about the UK, Israel, Canada. And the UCs and the CSUs remain test free, meaning that they do not want your SAT or your ACT scores. They may ask for AP scores, so it is perfectly reasonable to take those tests and think about submitting them. But that is the landscape we're in. TBD, if there's a big, wave of we're going back to requiring testings, I will obviously let everybody know. So with that, we've appropriately seen more folks in each senior class the past couple of years move into wanting to take some tests. And I think this year it's somewhere between like a third and a quarter of the senior class who is not engaged in any testing. And that has been fine. At this moment, everyone who has applied and is intending to go to a four-year college in the senior class has gotten into one or obviously multiple ones. So not testing can also be a very valid path. But the majority are taking at least a test to have something in their back pocket or going at it multiple times to try and get the highest score possible. Okay, so to your question, Erica, thank you for sitting through that. Um, I think test prep is most effective in like the 8 weeks or so before you are actually sitting for a test. And so, whether or not you are choosing to spend some summertime or do a long-term class or whatnot on testing, I think depends on how early the student might test in junior year. Keep in mind that this is not a one size fits all answer. So I would think about where is your student curricularly, especially with math. The SAT is more algebraic, the ACT is more geometric. Folks who have Algebra 2 in their schedule in junior year shouldn't be doing a test early in junior year because there are curricular things that they will gain, and they shouldn't be trying to do it kind of backwards through test prep. They will gain by being in that class, right? And these tests are really not, they're designed for seniors in high school, right? And the process has sort of shoved them backwards in time where it may or may not be appropriate for everyone. I would also think about what PSAT scores looked like for your child this past year and what sort of percentile they were in. I will say generally, and this is rare for a sophomore, but if your student got a 1200 or above on their sophomore year PSAT, they might be a candidate for taking a test earlier. That shows that they have some testing skills and all of that. And perhaps some of their coursework is more advanced, and they could benefit from knocking out a test in like December of this year or whatnot. Most other students are falling below that, and that is most likely because of curricular reasons, although sometimes it might be neurodiversity or whatnot. And so I would not feel pressure to be using this upcoming summer to do test prep. I'm also weary of test prep becoming like an extracurricular activity because your kids will burn out. There is a moment at which they become completely sick of the situation. So I am happy to talk offline with individual families as you're trying to think about what's sort of right for you, because this really is a like your student's going to get a particular prescription from me that is not applicable to everyone else. So we can talk about that. And no, we have things set up in the fall to help them determine SAT or ACT. The SAT is the one most of us know, especially, if we took it when applying to colleges. The ACT has kind of emerged to be more dominant and accepted everywhere in the last 15 or 20 years. But the ACT can have real advantages for students who do have more of a math weakness. It's only 25% of the overall score. The rest of it is more reading comprehension, graph interpretation, sort of more of the verbal skills. The timing can be different on the tests. And as I said, what they cover in math can be a little bit different. So they will take the PSAT again in the fall of junior year. And I also offer a free test ACT, a prep practice test of the ACT. And then we'll look at the results of those together, talk with your student about their experience of each test, because sometimes there's fewer seconds per question and all of that, and then make an informed decision. Most students are doing prep in the winter and early spring of junior year and taking their first test in March, April, May, somewhere around that time, whatever navigates around the journeys and PASOK and all of that. And generally, if a student is really trying hard to get those rarefied air test scores, they might take the test 3 times. They might do it once or twice in the spring, or once in the spring of junior year, once in the summer, once in the fall, maybe twice in the fall. It really kind of depends on which test they're pursuing and the timing of it all. But that is usually a totally fine runway for them to get, if they're going capable of getting to that higher score, to get there. And usually folks are trying to finish their testing by October of senior year to be able to submit it for that November 1st deadline. So that's the big scope of things. And yes, getting an actual sitting continues to be like a registration, continues to be incredibly frustrating. And it is at this point more specific to places like California and New York, where some of the public schools have stayed either test optional or test free, because of course, testing centers don't feel the need to offer as many tests here. And so when I complain to College Board or ACT that it's been really difficult for our students to find something that's not 90 miles from home, they say, well, become a test center. I say, well, we have some security issues with just opening our doors and to the general public. And there's nothing saying that if JCHS were a test center, that our kids don't get priority with that, right? We could have all those seats filled with Lowell students. So anyway, know that I am yelling at these test organizations, but we will have another opportunity for a Zoom before the school year starts in August, specifically for your kids and you. And at that moment, I do recommend at this point, unfortunately, to just book maybe both an ACT and an SAT sitting in March, April, May, June, something like that, at the end of junior year when the registration opens. And you can cancel it, you can move it around, but just so you at least have one seat. And then we can go through the process of figuring out which one is better for them. But yeah, until College Board and ACT get more responsive. And they have been trying to like rent out the Moscone Center and local hotels and all of that. But the testing situation remains in flux and a little bit frustrating. And to some degree, we are all in this like testing jail that we don't have a lot of control over. So
That's very helpful. Thank you,
such a
Lauren.
long answer. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's really helpful. It's a relief because now he won't do that this summer.
Yeah, yeah. And please, you're going to have so many hyperactive parent friends that are doing all sorts of different things. And whether it's starting something, what feels like a little early to me, or feeling like you got to throw money at the problem and have like an independent consultant for every particular part of the process,
Yeah,
know that there's so many people trying to make money off your anxiety. And I am always here as like a balance check on whether it's necessary. So,
thank
yeah,
you.
of
I'll keep it in check. I appreciate you. Thank you.
course. Yeah. Naomi.
Hi, thank you so much for this really helpful session. I just wanted to hear if you could just talk very briefly about other gap year options. Like I did a gap year in Israel between high school and college, but I was just kind of curious. Like I feel like it's much more common nowadays than it used to be. Like, what are the other programs that exist out there aside from like make up your own thing and then the Israel gap year options?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So to give everyone just general context, I literally was updating my gap year slides yesterday for junior parents. So this is all fresh in my head. We will generally have 20 to 30% of the senior class at JCHS choosing to do a gap year. And they still go through the college admission process, generally, if a four-year college is their goal, alongside their peers in senior year. Well, they have access to all the resources while things are fresh in their mind, and while they're not necessarily locked in until you sign a contract on the gap year. I mean, I'm wondering how the war stuff in the last week may impact some of our students thinking about going to Israel in particular. So they still go through the process, and then we ask for a deferral from the colleges that they're admitted to and where they want to go, and that's usually a pretty perfunctory thing. 90% of our students do go to Israel. So that is by far and away the predominant option. There's always at least one that is doing something else, sometimes two. But Israel is, I think the biggest choice. What they choose to do in Israel can vary wildly. And we have always folks thinking about a yeshiva or a seminary, more sort of orthodox programs where there's text study and, a deep dive into identity and whatnot. There's a growing chunk that are choosing to pursue a Mahina, which can be a nice way to also scale up your Hebrew, interact more with Israelis. The Mahinas are, army prep for Israeli folks, but for international students, they can also be army prep, and we have had folks do that and then enlist in the IDF. But for others, it's just a chance to really immerse themselves in Israeli culture, Hebrew learning, and sometimes it's just a 6-month experience. Sometimes it's more than that. But those and they're Zionist programs, and so those have been important for some of our kids as well. And then there's more just sort of general secular, whether it's big tech stuff or whether it's travel or different types of learning. We have folks that do a program with Bar Ilan each year where they get a whole year's worth of college credit. So there's a bunch of Israel options, obviously. Outside of that, keep in mind that it doesn't have to be like a program. So some folks might have an internship. They might sew together a couple of opportunities. Maybe they do an 8 weeks Outward Bound or Knowles program, and then they, choose to work at home and save some money for college. Maybe they volunteer somewhere. We do have folks that think about City Year, AmeriCorps, where you are sort of volunteering in a community for a year, but it's not costing, money. If anything, sometimes you might get paid for that or kind of come out neutral because they pay for your housing or whatnot. And then we do have some students that do programs internationally. So there are language immersion programs that have been popular. There, our one student this year who graduated last year doing something different, Ryan Schwartzman, spent the fall doing a sort of rock climbing program. And so he spent the fall both domestically, he was in the Rocky Mountains, and then they went to Patagonia in the spring. And he just posted the most gorgeous pictures on Instagram. They all hit friend on me like after graduation in the Pacific. He's doing something called Pacific Discovery, where I think he's doing like some marine biology things and whatnot. And that's typical for the folks who don't go to Israel. They might sew together sort of two different experiences or something with some travel component to it. I have a lot of resources on this. There's also 2 pages in the College Advising Handbook that's available on the College Advising website to download that gives some links, some general things to think about. And I will say go overseas, and I think it's .com, but if you just put go overseas in your web browser, it should come up. That for me is the standard best search engine for all types of GAP programs. If they're on there, they've been kind of vetted, they have insurance, they've been, been around for a while, they have some decent reviews. So I would check that out. But I will say, as someone who was on the college side for so long, any kind of gap year, colleges, I think, are pretty psyched about. And those students arrive on the college campus more mature, more independent, more focused, more ready to take advantage of what's offered on the college campus and like refreshed. I think that high school has become such a hamster wheel for students now that sometimes even the most high achieving folks, often the most high achieving folks, if they go straight to a college campus, sometimes they can just implode because they think they've hit the destination, right? All the things they were working for, but it's really just the start of another journey, right? And so to have that moment to just like, who am I? What do I want to do? I had a menu for myself in high school. Now I'm in college. It's an entirely new and more robust menu. What do I want to do with this, right? They just come in a little bit more locked in. So before I get to you, Ben, I'm just going to check the chat real quick. There was one more question about testing. When does registration open for ACT and SAT test dates? I wish I had an exact date. It's kind of a sliding thing. Sometimes it's as early as this month, but it could be into April or May. So once I hear, and sometimes College Board or ACT let counselors know in advance, sometimes it's a family that lets me know, oh, it's open. I will try and push that out to everyone so we can just like get those placeholders in place. And then there's a question about, can you speak about the role of college reps? Yes, I don't remember them from when I applied to schools. How important is it to establish relationships with them, and what does that look like? Excellent question. I did just kind of glaze right over that. Yes, as college admission has gotten more competitive, and especially in those most highly rejective places, and conversely, at just smaller schools, and some of those may be very broad access, 80% admit rate or whatnot. You have opportunities with the humans that are doing the process. And being at a place like JCHS, where it's a small school, these college visits are small. I was a rep on the road for 18 years, and I'd go into a public high school and maybe be met with an auditorium of 20 kids, right? And I'd come to JCHS, I used to recruit at JCHS, and have 4 kids in a room. And then I'd remember their names and they'd ask multiple questions. And so just basically, there are humans engaged in this process. And while at this point AI might review a transcript to make sure that you've hit your eligibility, with a particular college, there are still humans making decisions at the end of the day. And so when you have human to human interaction, it's just things become less objective and they become more subjective. Humans start rooting for other humans, right? So I do think it makes sense just generally when you have the opportunity to access an admission rep that's responsible for your application in JCHS to introduce yourself or send an email or whatnot. At some places, there is something called demonstrated interest, which we'll talk more about over the next year or two, meaning the kind of contact you've had with a college can help your chances of admission. Generally, this is not a thing at like big public institutions. They have too many applications and they are focused on equity, right? So, like the UCs, they don't care. If you've never opened an email from them, whatever. On the other end of the spectrum, famously, a school like Tulane cares a lot and tracks all of it. Literally, if you've opened an email from them, right? So when I'm aware of places for whom demonstrated interest is a thing, and they start to, rise up on your student's college list, I am going to start nagging about, did you RSVP for that event or did you go to something online? That is such a great option now, especially since COVID. The online stuff has become much more quality and ubiquitous. It doesn't have to be about physically getting to the campus to have had interaction with someone. But obviously, if a human from that school comes to JCHS, unless you've got a really important AP chemistry lab that day, which happens, or whatnot, you should come sit in 120 and interact with that human to get that plus mark in your column. So, and they're also just more pragmatically and less cynically a good resource to learn about the school. So as we have seniors right now, getting the decisions and feeling like, okay, so now I'm in the driver's seat and I need to make a final decision, they can email those reps and say, can you put me in touch with a Jewish student? Can you tell me, a faculty member who does costume design? That this is your entry point then into getting questions answered about that school. And you can look at it as a free sample of life on that school, like how responsive that person is, how useful it is. So the reps are important in that way as well. Ben, thank you for being so patient.
No problem. And I somehow missed the memo that this was by Zoom, so I actually came to JCHS this
Oh,
morning.
oh,
So,
well, I hope you're having a
yeah,
nice time with the
that's all
journey
right.
energy on campus.
Exactly. Anyway, but thank you for doing this. Question I had was, you have a very, very impressive reputation both inside JCHS and outside. I've talked to folks in other high schools. Oh my God, JCHS, those kids get into really good colleges, and it seems like we punch above our weight. And I'm just curious, like, what your secret sauce is, or what approach, or how you're able to do that at JCHS. Especially, I hate to say it now, it seems like not every college seems to be the most receptive to Jewish students. So in this environment in particular, it seems we have a little more of a headwind. Like how you're able to do that. I'm just curious.
What a great question. Thank you for the compliments. I would say it's not in me necessarily, but I do think, I've been in this field for a while and I do have, as I said, a lot of connections. And so I do try and use them not to like get kids in, but to figure out like what is this place looking for and what do we need to lean into and what do we maybe want to de-emphasize a little bit. And thinking strategically about what classes look like. And I will say, um, there's very reasonable concern about how welcome Jewish students may be on campus, what the climate might look like. We certainly have all had enough in our headlines the last 2 years around this. But my experience being out in the world as I meet with those humans at those schools is that the admission offices, and if anything, I think the last 2 years I've been watching it explicitly, are bending over backwards to change that narrative and are a little mortified by it. And so I do think that there are times where the thumb can be on the scale for us right now as they're interested in changing that narrative. But I do my best. I try and stay on top of all of the things. And I think we're really lucky to be at a school where all of the adults really care and are doing the best they can for our kids. And the fact that we've got 360 degrees of humans giving them inputs on how to be the best humans possible, and that comes out in their applications, that sets them up for success too. But I will say, we don't always get it right. We don't always have wins. We've had some losses this week. That just is what it is. But generally, if y'all can try and listen to my advice, and especially your kids, because sometimes there is a feeling like, the thing I read on TikTok is clearly true, and whatever you're saying, Miss Cook, it doesn't align with that. And to also like be clear-eyed and reasonable about the stats and the odds are not ever in our favor, and just to try and have that balanced list that we're going to end up with some success to stay open to places you haven't heard of and all the rest. I don't know that that was a satisfactory answer for you, but it's my best, yeah, shot at it. So. Um, and then let's see, we've got something else in the chat. Israel also has Reichman University. Yes, they do have a 3-year international BA program. Yeah, and there are a number of Israeli colleges that I'm seeing both visiting us more and students having more interest in. Historically, we've had more contact with Israeli colleges through gap year programs, something where they might take some classes on a campus and then have like a travel or experiential component related to that. And part of that, because of the service requirement in Israel, if you go to college at 18 there from the US, your peers generally are going to be older than you, right? It's folks that have gotten out of their Army service. But that is changing a bit as they have more international student options, more programs in English. And, as the climate here continues to have a question mark on it. So last year, Hebrew University, Technion, Reichman, a lot of places visited JCHS. Hebrew University actually has a rep who lives in San Francisco, not far from JCHS. She and I are good friends at this point. And more students are really applying directly and keeping that option open. So, and absolutely a good one. And it is a much less mysterious and competitive process than some US schools. So, for a lot of them, if you have X, Y, and Z grades, curriculum, sometimes some AP test scores and whatnot, you're going to be admitted. So, yeah. 8:47. What other questions do we have as we get closer to 9? Anything else on your mind? Yes, Erica.
I'm curious about international schools as it relates to going like for graduate school or,
Mhm.
further education. Like, is there I grew up in this country. I went to a program for a year in London, but I was in my college. So how
Mhm.
does it look for like American universities for kids going to schools and universities, internationally, like for graduate programs? Does it matter?
For graduate programs, I think that is more about because, graduate school is more geared towards your intended profession. I think it's mostly around how would that credential look in that program from that school with the field that you're intending to do. So I think it's more of a question of if you intend to come back to the US or if you intend to end up in Israel or if you want to be in the UK, how does that graduate program set you up for that? Or does it create any barriers? Sometimes a teaching credential or, something doesn't translate across borders. Um, for undergraduate, I think it can be a wonderful opportunity. And we've got kids right now in Scotland. We had someone just graduate from esteemed arts college in London with a big stage management degree and job. We've had students in Israel. And the Israel paths right now have been more like they went for a gap year and decided to stay. Or we've got a couple of kids who started at a UC as the horrors persisted, they decided we're going to transfer and went to a college in Israel. But I think it can be great. And, to have that independent experience for some of those students, they, are making Aliyah and choosing to stay in Israel. But some want to come back for graduate school, and that's totally a pathway too. And think it makes them a more interesting and unique candidate to be coming with that outside the US perspective and experience. So it's an individual decision. And again, we've got such a wonderful array of individuals at JCHS. So whatever your student's thinking about, I can't wait to research it because, just in the past few weeks, I've been looking at where there is, a clowning center near a college campus because it's very important that the student can continue clowning. I've looked at where roller derby is present and there's a scene. I've looked at, how you construct roller coasters and who like teaches about the physics of that if you want to design them. So I love my job. It's just fabulous.
Yeah. Thanks. You do a great job at it. I know.
Naomi, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to hear a little bit about any tips you have about how to develop the list I have an older kid and who's a senior, and
Mhm.
we were totally blindsided by like not really having any idea how to help him create the list because there are like so many colleges out there, and like we know like the name recognition ones, but like how do you? So can you talk a little bit about? I know you're going to support them, but like how can we help? How can we help that process?
Yeah, I think at this moment, you can live your life like a college counselor and think as you're going to a family bar mitzvah or a wedding or going on a trip.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a college nearby, even just drive through it. But exposure right now to some types of places, I think is really key. So go take, and the formal tour can be helpful. You might live down the road from USF and think, well, I understand USF, but go take the formal tour and hear the like admission spiel on it. But whether it's a big public institution, whether it's a smaller private campus, whether it's a place that's more of an affinity school like JCHS, or if you're thinking about an art school or a women's college or a more STEM focused place, just try out some types, something more rural, something more urban. I think about it like when I was searching for my first home back in Massachusetts, where I could afford a home. That it wasn't until I went, on 3 or 4 different house visits where I was like, oh, someone else's carpet doesn't appeal to me. I think I want wood floors, right? Like until you're standing in it and you have either a positive or a negative reaction to something, it's hard to sort of think about, okay, this is the genre in which maybe I'm going to feel most comfortable. So that's one piece of things. We're also going to be looking at where they have the possibility of admission. That will come down the road. We have more data to collect, and it's usually towards the end of junior year that I start putting some predictions on their list of like, okay, we've got way too many schools that are going to be a reach for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
conversely, we've got way too many that you're likely to get into. I want to see you push yourself a little bit more, that there are, some more selective places out there that could be really good for you in the peer group you'd find there. And then, of course, if they have some idea about what they want to study, looking to see the places that rate highly in that or specialize in that or have unique programs. If they're more, unclear or just they're a high achieving generalist and don't know which way they want to go, then perhaps looking at some liberal arts framework or at least schools where you're not siloed early on. Like the CSUs, you literally have to check off a major on the application. And it's not impossible to change your mind and switch majors, but it's more complicated than it is at other places. So the structure that the school have can be part of it as well. Finances, for sure. And that's where
Mm-hmm.
I can also give some assistance on who gives strong merit aid of private schools, if an out-of-state public school is going to give some money to an out-of-state student or not. So these are the factors I'm thinking about as I start to suggest a list. And if we go into that first meeting, if I meet your child in December of this year and they got nothing in score, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take the questionnaire that has your input, which has some questions about financial things and whatnot the student may not have
Mm-hmm.
opinions on or know about, and give you 15 places to start with.
Mm-hmm.
Because starting with whatever we've got at this point, 4,000 colleges is just too crazy. And I should also add, Jewish life. Huge filter that I try and
Mm-hmm.
put things through, even if your student says, I don't care, and some do, because I think they assume there's Jews everywhere. And, that I'm going to run it through the Jewish life filter of my own, and whether that's about size or climate or whatever, we can talk about level of observance, but those are all some factors I think to be thinking about as you try and construct a list. And
Awesome.
ultimately, the average JCHS student applies to about 10 schools.
Mm.
So there can be more than that. There can be less than that, especially if you go like the early decision route and you get into your top choice. But averages right now are around 10.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a question in the chat. Can you talk about recommendations? Do you write each counselor recommendation and then the students generally pick 2 more from core subjects? Do advisors play a role? Thanks. Great question. Yes, generally, I draft a counselor recommendation for every student. Sometimes if someone only applies to say UCs or CSUs, it doesn't get submitted. But I find it just as an exercise to get a bird's eye view of your student that it's really useful for me. And I do that this summer before senior year. But no, I've been stalking your students since they enrolled. So they have a folder in my office. I put things in it. If they give a DeVar Torah, if they're in a play, I've got the playbill that I'm collecting a file on them like the FBI over the years. And then, the questionnaires and all of those things go in there as well. And so I am talking about them in context of JCHS and the curricular choices they can make, the extracurricular ways that they're engaged. I look at faculty narratives and kind of summarize words that come up really often about them, and try and do a high level description of them. And then, yes, usually the maximum required recommendations is 2 from teachers. Sometimes we can submit more. Sometimes I encourage folks, especially if they're thinking about really those super selective places where they might be deferred or waitlisted, that we keep another recommendation on file that we use as last minute advocacy, to make an extra case for them. So 2 faculty members generally. Sometimes the advisor is in there, especially if they've had a class with them. Or they're in there if it's also learning support, or they're a coach, or that there's some other way that they've interfaced with them. But also, rabbis, piano teachers, ballet teachers, folks outside of JCHS, their JFCS internship person, that can make an excellent like third optional recommendation as well. So I will be talking with them about this at various points throughout junior year. And then help them as they actually make those requests. We have in our timeline to make those requests in May of junior year, so that faculty go into the summer before senior year knowing what their workload is. And some folks, like Miss Rabinowitz, cranks them out during the summer. They're great. They're detailed. They're like 8-point font. She's a great person to have as a recommender. Mr. Pollock is very popular because he teaches all the AP histories and the coaching and all of that. So sometimes he has 20 to write, so we don't give him time to do that. And yeah, that's the general scope of things with recommendations. Um, all right. It is 8:57. Ben, did you have another question? Did you?
I did, but I
Yeah.
mean, well, only just early admissions. Can you speak a little? You mentioned that, like, it
Yep.
seems like that's growing in importance given how many, the
Yep.
volume of applications and how to kind of position. So can you speak a little bit about early, how important that is and the role that
Yeah.
plays?
Yeah, and it's good to start getting this terminology in your brain. So there are basically 2 types of early decision, although some of the Ivies have created their own third, typical. So early decision, think of it like you have to decide that you have a first choice. It is where you apply to a place and say, if you take me, I'm going to go. And the student literally, well, now they like type in their name as signing it. The parent has to sign something. I have to sign something saying we all understand that we are committed to this place. And so, as you can imagine, this is a strategic choice that can be really helpful. Some highly selective places, you see a much larger admit rate when you've applied early decision than their regular decision admit rate, because schools know it's a 1-for-1 ratio. I can admit one person and get them to enroll. Where with regular decision, it might be a 4-to-1 ratio, right? Where I have to admit 4 kids and one of them may choose to come to my institution. So it's one of these ways they're, maneuvering their admit rates, their US News and World Report standing, their stats, all of that. So it advantages the college, clearly. It can advantage the student because you've gotten into your first choice. You're done in December, January of senior year. That feels good. But it also advantages folks who don't feel the financial pressure with how expensive college is. And so that's where, when you see public conversation about early decision, about how equitable it is. Now, most places are going to give the same aid they would give early decision as they would regular decision. Most places will release you from the contract if for some reason the financial stuff does not work out the way it's supposed to. But we have seen some shenanigans this year with that. Tulane in particular was in, I forget if it was the Post or the New York Times, for putting a school in Denver in timeout this year, because one of their early decision applicants did not enroll. And so they have said to this school in Denver, so for the next year, no one from your school can apply early decision to Tulane. Yeah. So we want you to take the early decision thing seriously. If you're a lawyer, this is not like a legally binding contract, but there can be ramifications, right? So that's early decision. Early action is the one that many more of our students, I really encourage them to use. I think 90% of our students applied somewhere early action this year, where you apply by that earlier deadline, which is a lot of work and organization and all of that to get yourself in and prepped and ready. But they do have slightly higher admit rates. It's not quite as exaggerated as early decision, but I think those colleges appreciate the enthusiasm, the organization, and all of that to get it in early. And again, you have some admission decisions by winter break or maybe January, and you can sit on those until May 1st. So there's no pressure to enroll. I mean, they will start emailing you all the time, these very sort of thirsty, like, please, please, it's time now, cut rate housing or whatever if you enroll. But I think that is a great avenue. And I'm actually seeing more schools like Brandeis introduced early action this year. I just got an email that Occidental is introducing early action for next year. So if they've got it, I would say let's lean into it. Now, a couple of places, Yale, Stanford, I'm not going to remember all of them, weirdly, Notre Dame, have created their own pathway called restricted early action, where you don't have to tell them until May 1st if you want to go, but you also can't apply to other places early. Yeah, so that's the restricted part, or at least private places early. So sometimes we have kids doing Stanford restricted early action. They could still apply to Michigan early action because it's a public school, but they can't apply to Tulane or Brandeis or other places. So they try and like force you to be at least in some ways a little sane that you're not applying to a bunch of places through all these early plans. But again, that's a very small subset of schools. So these are all strategic things. We are in the weeds now that we can talk about, as we are formulating your list more and seeing what the various application plans are. But that's one reason November 1st is such a big date. That's usually the first early deadline, both decision and action. And so, yeah, October is a scramble, and then we kind of, are coasting a little bit into finishing out the rest of their list.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys, it's 9:02, so I'm going to let you go. So appreciate all of these questions. I hope this has been helpful. If you want to watch it again, you'll get a video coming to your inboxes next week. But for now, Shabbat Shalom, and hope you have a lovely weekend and a good journeys week as your kids are out on the road. Bye.